Ulster District Council webinar on leading teams during a pandemic by Julie Allen from Julie Allen Consulting. This is just one of 12 events that have been organised by the Council during Enterprise Week to support local businesses through this very challenging time. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This session is being recorded at the moment, so you won't actually appear on camera. It will just be myself and Julie. So your microphones and cameras are off and you're able to view the webinar this morning. The recording of the webinar will be put onto the Council's website at the start of next week. So you'll be able to watch the webinar back again. We will also be sending at the end of this a copy of the slides. So do take notes as you go along, but don't be panicking that you have to write everything down, because a copy of the slides will be sent to you. We do want this webinar to be engaging. So you do have the chat facility, which you'll see on your screen. If you move your mouse, you probably see it at the bottom. Some people maybe have it at the top, depending on their settings. And in that chat, you can put any questions or any comments forward, and Julie will be able to see them. We also have a Q&A button. So if you actually want to put any actual questions to Julie, you can use that button as well, or you can use the chat. So whichever you would prefer to use. So I'm delighted to introduce Julie, this afternoon's speaker. We're really looking forward to this interactive or interesting and informative session. So I'm going to hand over to you, Julie, and I will then see you at the end whenever we do Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. And also thank you to Mid-Ulster Council for inviting me back to provide you with some information on leading teams. So as Neil says, this afternoon I'd like to spend a little bit of time with you talking about leading teams through a pandemic. In terms of leading teams through the pandemic, what I'll be specifically looking at is developing teams that are enthusiastic, energetic, and emotionally connected to your organisational purpose. So that's the theme and the purpose of the session. So welcome to everybody that has come along, or welcome back for those of you that have attended a previous session that I did with Mid-Ulster Council. For those of you looking at your screen and thinking perhaps that I have forgotten to hit the presenter view for PowerPoint, I haven't. Those of you that have attended before will know that I do like these sessions to be very engaging and interactive. And so what I will be doing at points in time through the webinar is I will be using templates to populate what you have told me. So Neil has highlighted the chat box and the question and answer box. So the question and answers, the questions are those things that we'll come to at the end of the webinar. But throughout the webinar, I'd like you to use the chat box when I'm asking some questions, because as I say, I will be using that information to populate some of the templates. So just very briefly, a little bit about myself and why I might be here talking about this subject. For over 20 years, I have been supporting employers to improve their organisations and create really great places to work. I have a vision of organisations that have people who are excited and enthusiastic about the work that they do, and that they really look forward to going to work every day. And in terms of the tools that I would use to achieve that is I improve psychological flexibility using the ACT model, which is a psychological behavioural model, and the ACT matrix, and I'll be sharing some of that with you today. I also help create psychologically safe organisations or teams, and I do that using the pro-social matrix. And again, I'll be sharing a little bit of that with you today. I also help leaders develop their emotional intelligence. The start of that process, I use the Thomas International TQ, which is a questionnaire that assesses an individual's emotional intelligence. And I am also familiar and an assessor for the EFQM, and the EFQM also have an innovation leader model as well. So I advise on both of those. So that's a little bit about myself. And in terms of the session today, what I'd like to do in terms of leading teams through a pandemic to create teams that are enthusiastic, energetic, and emotionally connected to your organisational purpose, I'd like to focus on 3 key areas. So the first is to become aware of the emotions and feelings showing up in your team and how this might be currently impacting on performance. I'd like you to appreciate the importance of psychological safety in high-performing teams and why it's necessary to create psychological safety within your team. And thirdly, is to know then how to create that psychological safety using the pro-social matrix. So before I go any further, I'd like to say I'm going to start with becoming aware of those emotions and feelings showing up within your team. And in doing so, I'd like to put a little bit of a warning out there for you. A warning in terms of your own emotions and feelings. And that is because I'm going to talk about a topic that might make some people feel uncomfortable. It may be a topic that they feel is negative, or perhaps a topic that you feel is not just for discussion during a webinar. And that discussion, or that topic I should say, is grief. And so why am I talking about grief when we're talking about leading teams, leading high-performing teams during a pandemic? And the importance of that is grief is all around us today. It might not be the word that you use for it, but grief and loss is something that each and every one of us are experiencing. I can't imagine that any of you on this webinar today haven't lost greatly. Many of you are employers, so you may have lost money. You may have lost customers. Your employees may have lost colleagues who have been made redundant or gone on furlough. Some of those people have lost in terms of some of those celebrations that they had hoped to have over the last 8 or 9 months. And that might have been big birthday celebrations or weddings. And simply some have lost in terms of being able to meet family and friends. And that is very relevant in terms of really just understanding where people are at and the emotions that might show up. So the warning is we're not going to talk about this for a long period of time if you're worried about this being negative or an unwanted feeling that you're experiencing. But it is important to have some of that discussion. And so in talking about grief, one of the things to highlight for you as an employer or you as a leader in your organisation is pre-COVID, there was some research done in the States which identified that unresolved grief in US companies is costing in the region of $75 billion. And that is as a result of unresolved grief, which contributes to a loss of productivity and a loss of performance. So why are we talking about this and why is it necessary? Is because it is impacting on your organisation today, and it has been for some time. So what I'd like to do is just very briefly help you to understand the grief process. And this is the grief curve that many of you will know as the change curve. You will have seen this before. And so in terms of those emotions that are showing up that relate to grief within your organisation, first of all, perhaps back in March, and I say back in March, but some people may be experiencing some of this today. So we have the denial of this virus won't impact on us, or perhaps this virus will not harm me. Denial perhaps of the impact that might have on the organisation. And so during the denial phase, we may experience emotions such as fear and confusion. When we move from the denial phase, we may move into anger. And I think in terms of anger, the anger phase, we see this showing up every day on the news and on social media. Anger in terms of the situation that we are in, angry at how we got here, angry in terms of the restrictions, and anger in terms of what we've lost. And during this period, we hear and feel those emotions about frustration and irritation and anxiety about the situation that we find ourselves within. When we move from anger, we can perhaps move to the next phase around bargaining. And again, I'm sure many of you will have heard yourself bargaining with yourself or with those people close to you. And during the bargaining stage, we start to look to what life might be like after we've experienced the loss and the grief. And we start to bargain and make promises to ourselves. So some of your employees may be saying things at the moment that are things like, I will never take my job for granted again. I will never take my friends and family for granted. And that when I get into the office, I will value every bit of time that I have there and not take those things for granted. And when we move then from the bargaining phase into depression around, some people will be feeling that at the moment around, when is this ever going to end? And in that depression stage, we feel helpless, we have low energy, and we just don't know when this will all end. And we will hear those comments from people. When we move from the depression stage into the acceptance of the new normal, acceptance of the loss of not going into the office, the loss that you have experienced as employers, which is huge and substantial. And that is identifying what we might be able to do moving on. So that is acceptance of living in this virtual world and making plans to deal with life as it is in that moment. And so this is the bit now that where I would like you to get involved in the chat box, those of you that are willing. And I'd like you to look at the grief curve now, and I'd like you to think about where you're at the moment. What are you feeling in terms of life at the moment? And perhaps where do you think your team are at the moment? So is there any particular piece in the grief cycle or the grief curve that I'm showing you that resonates with you and that you can feel that's the point that you're at? So if anybody is willing and able, please go ahead and share this in the chat box, and I'll come back to using that as we move into other elements of the session. I'm just going to give that a moment to see if anybody's willing. And so yes, people can identify various people in their organisation at various stages. And that is hugely important. Some identifying, yes, that depression might be where people are at the moment. If we're going to create high-performing teams, some of these words that are now coming up may feel negative, but it is where people are at. And in terms of leading the team, we need to understand those emotions. We need to be able to understand those to be able to help people to move to the next stage within the grief curve. And we also need to look at, as leaders, what can we do to support people to move them to that next phase. So in terms of what everybody has experienced and the emotions that they are experiencing, what will happen is we will adapt our behaviour. We will respond in a way that relates to what is showing up inside. That is those emotions and feelings. And so in doing so, some of your people may have adopted some behaviour that leads them to be silent. It may even be that you've adopted that behaviour yourself. And so the silence is around that information. The silence is around people not wanting to raise concerns and perhaps even come up with ideas or suggestions because it might bother you as their leader in terms of the time that might take to look at that and to resolve it. They don't want to raise issues, that they don't want to say things that might upset their colleagues because really there's been enough upset to this point. And for some it might be because it simply just doesn't matter. because it won't change anything. And so what I'll do is I'll just keep my head down and I'll do my work and I'll just wait to be told what to do. This not only applies in the workplace, but it also applies in our own personal lives. So what I'd like you to do is to think about, have you ever held back from saying something, either in your personal or in your working lives? And Neil has set up a poll for us. And Neil, if you could just activate that poll for me. And it's a simple yes or a no answer. So I'd like you to just, have you ever held back? Have you not spoken when you thought you should have? And just while I'm waiting on that, there's one question is, what is the time frame for flowing through this life cycle? And the answer to that, there isn't a time scale. Different people will take different periods of time to go through the cycle. But what I'm going to talk you through is ways of which you can help people to go through that at a much quicker speed. We need to go through those different phases, not always all of those phases, but I'm going to help you to understand how to do that. So if we look at our poll is an overwhelming majority that we have all held back at some time. And that can be detrimental to organisations. And so why is that detrimental? And that's what I'd like to share with you. So we've got, I think, 88% of those people on the webinar today have held back. And so I'm just going to close that down for us. So the impact of silence in an organisation can be substantial. And that is, if we remain silent, that means that problems can go unreported. So we may see dips in terms of a particular service area. We may know the reason for that, but simply not say, because it's not worth it. It's not worth it for the grief, perhaps, that I might get from my colleagues. Or they may feel that, I may feel that I'm stupid even raising this. Improvement opportunities are missed, and tragic failures can occur. So most of the major health and safety incidents that occur will have occurred because at some point or other, somebody stayed silent. They didn't raise the issue for a variety of different reasons. And there's lots of research to show that that is the case. And so when problems go unreported, improvement opportunities are missed, and tragic failures occur, then you as an organisation will have a loss of competitive edge. And at an individual level, what we will find is we will regret not speaking up at that particular moment in time. And in terms of the impact of silence, I suppose that one of the big examples of the silence and the impact that that has from a competitive edge point of view and tragic failures, one to highlight is Volkswagen. So most of you know the Volkswagen story, that Volkswagen designed a car that was designed to reduce the emissions and to pass the tests in terms of those emissions. The leader at Volkswagen gave the team 6 weeks to achieve the ambition of producing the car with the very low emissions. And in doing so, in giving the 6-week period, they were also informed of the outcome of that. And the outcome was, if they couldn't achieve the ambition within 6 weeks, each and every one of those team would lose their job. So of course, what happened next is everybody did what they could to achieve the goal, simply to ensure that they could survive for their families. And what we know now is the system was developed really that there weren't low emissions, but it was designed to pass the test. And really what we know is there were 40 people in 3 different brands and 4 different cities within Volkswagen. So there were a huge number of people knew what was going on, and nobody said anything. And so the impact of that was they lost their competitive edge with their customers, they lost trust and confidence, And that really isn't good. So at the moment, it's imperative really that the people that you have within your team will talk about what is going on and what they are feeling or what they are seeing, and that you are hearing all of that. And so how do we overcome the barriers for silence? Because the barriers of silence is the fear of speaking up, the fear of upsetting other people, and the apathy of really, sure, it just doesn't matter. And the way in which we do that is to, first of all, to create something called psychological flexibility within individuals. And psychological flexibility is enabling people to notice what they need to do. So understanding the life that they want to live and being able to move towards that life, even in the presence of difficulties. So that is when fear shows up, is not going away from that life and not highlighting those things, but moving towards it in the presence of those emotions and feelings. And the way we create that psychological flexibility is by using the ACT matrix. The ACT matrix is a known behavioural therapy, behavioural science it comes from. So ACT stands for Acceptance Commitment Therapy, or Acceptance Commitment Training. Dr. Kevin Polk created what is called the ACT matrix because this is a very simple tool to use with any individual to help them to understand really the human experience and how we respond to our thoughts and feelings. And that is what I'm going to take you through now, so that you can understand both yourself and you can understand individuals in terms of leading teams and helping them to be the person that you want them to be in the workplace, or they also want to be in the workplace in terms of their behaviour. So to explain the ACT matrix, what I'd like to do is I'm going to start at the top of the matrix, where we've got the 5 senses experience, and that is the external world. So in terms of life, we experience, first of all, with our 5 senses. It is what we see, what we hear, what we can touch, what we can taste, and what we can smell. That is the real world in which we live in. And when we experience in the 5 senses, what we see, what we hear, what we touch, what we taste, what we smell flows through us. And then we experience in the internal world. It is what we experience in our mind. It is what the thoughts and the feelings that come as a result of those 5 senses, or the external world that we are experiencing. So it's thoughts, sensations, feelings and emotions, or even urges. And in the middle, what you'll see there I have is noticing. And that is because we need to notice when we're in the internal world or when we're in the external world. There are many of us today, because of the situation that we find ourselves in within this pandemic, we are spending quite substantial periods of time in the internal world. Again, I'll ask the question, and I'll keep explaining things while you might want to put some evidence of this in the chat box. And that is, perhaps is anybody even willing to share how much of the time within your day that you are spending in the internal world as opposed to the external world? So the external world is fully experiencing the external world as opposed to being dragged into the internal world. And we'll see when we go through the matrix the reality of that. And the other line that I have is away and towards. So if we're going to notice what matters to live the life that we want to live, even in the presence of difficulties, then we need to notice when we are moving away from or we are moving towards the life that we want to live. And so to start with the ACT matrix and getting this interactive, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start on the bottom left. So when we use the ACT matrix, we always start with the bottom left. And the ACT matrix is really when we are talking about what is important to you as an individual. It is any individual, it's not other people. So the question here that I'm asking you is, using the chat box, Can you tell me who is important to you? You as individuals, who are the people that are important to you? So I'll get us started while I wait for you to use the chat box. So family. Great. Everybody's on the same wavelength. So to their family, who else might be important to you? So we're talking about work today. So our colleagues, maybe also people, great, thank you, Emma. Friends. Friends will be important. Colleagues, friends, family, colleagues, pets, thank you. Yes, pets also important. So even if we think about that group of 4 people at the moment, and children, thank you, children. And actually there's an obvious one there just before I move that's missing. Who is important to you in your life? Ourselves. Great. And ourselves often comes last in the list. So if I ask, okay then, so who is important? Then the other question that I'd like to ask you now is, so what's important in terms of those people? What's important to you in terms of how you live your life? Anybody willing to tell me about what's important to you? Well, again, I'll get us started. So what I mean by that is, so what's important in terms of myself, my friends, my family and my colleagues, even at the moment, I think it is my health and well-being. So if I am well, then I can support those individuals. There's lots of things that I can do, but if I'm not well, then I won't be able to work. Happiness. Thank you. Integrity. Integrity and compassion. Great. Security, so job security. Honesty. Okay, so we've got reaching out. So we've got enough in there as examples to look at, okay, so who is important in our life and what is important in our life, and being helpful. So the one thing that I'd like to emphasize at this stage is that those things, I have those in the bottom left, is because those are things we experience in the inner world. They are in my mind. They are not things, well, they are things that I can see and touch, being my family, but it is my mind telling me that those are important. Those are the important people and the what's important. So if I stay in the internal world, the next question that I have for you then is, so in terms of who and what's important, then what unwanted stuff shows up for you as an individual that you'd prefer not to experience? So in the internal world, those are feelings and emotions that you'll be experiencing now, have been over the last perhaps 8 months. So frustration. Okay, so frustration, anger. Thank you for those that are willing to share. Conflicted, overwhelmed, disappointed, some may feel sad, some may feel guilt, some may feel even anxious, and some feel disconnected. Okay, so these are purely just some examples to help you to understand the ACT matrix, and to understand not only the ACT matrix, but the purpose of that is to understand what is showing up. So in the bottom part of the matrix, we're talking about the internal experiences. Now, if we think about what you've told me in terms of the internal world and those emotions, the next question then is, in terms of those emotions, what do any of you do to get rid of that unwanted stuff? So the frustration and the anger and the conflicted and the feeling overwhelmed and disappointed and sad. So how you get rid of that is some will meditate, some will exercise, some will go for a walk, some will do yoga, bake, get fresh air, read, talk to family and friends. Anybody do anything else that watch Netflix? Thank you. Watch Netflix. Is there anybody there that does any shouting because they're angry, venting on social media, counselling? So some people may attend counselling. So what I'd like you to do here is to understand now that what's at the top part of the matrix here is in the top left. These are things that we do to get rid of those experiences that show up inside. And as individuals, we are all, I think, taught perhaps at times to think that there are certain emotions that are good or bad or negative or positive. And some of what we've got in the bottom left of this matrix, people will perceive to be negative things, perhaps that we shouldn't talk about. Perhaps that's how people have been taught as a child, that you simply don't talk about those things and that you try to remain positive. But the one thing that I would say is those emotions that you have are an armory of emotions that you need, and you need those to survive life. So the one thing that I don't have in there, for example, is fear. And I think I'm just going to add it in because I think there are many people that are fearful at the moment of the situation that they might find themselves in, being able to perform at work, being able to keep their job, in terms of the security even. And so people will say fear to be something that's bad. It's bad to get nervous. But if you're in a burning building, then fear is something that's really great to have, because fear means that the fight or flight response will be activated and that you will leave that building quicker than you've been able to do before. So what I'd like you to do as an individual today is to allow your emotions to show up, to understand what is showing up, to be able to name that emotion as an individual, and to be aware of what you might be doing to get rid of that emotion. Because actually getting rid of emotions all the time isn't necessarily healthy. So one of the things that I would describe is if you think about your emotion as a ball, and if you imagine you're in water and you're pushing that down all the time, it will pop up. So we can try to ignore and avoid those emotions by watching Netflix, shouting and venting, meditating and exercise, but it is about acknowledging those and naming those emotions when they show up and allowing them to be there. And really then in the top right of the matrix, we answer another question, which is, what could we do to move towards the who and what is important? So instead of watching Netflix or shouting or venting or reading perhaps, what are the other things that I could do that would move me towards health and well-being, happiness, integrity, living my life with integrity and compassion, feeling secure, honest, reaching out and helpful? What are some of the things that I could do as an individual that would be helpful in terms of that? Anybody willing to start the chat box again? So talk. So it could be, again, some of what's on the left part of the matrix could be appear here. So reach out to individuals. It could be the exercise, because we do know exercise is good for us. It could be the yoga, and it could be the counselling. The reason that things are on the left or the right side of the matrix at the top is the reason that we do those things. So help someone who is more vulnerable. So it could be perhaps doing somebody's shopping for them. It could be just reaching out and having that phone call with them. It's about finding time to relax. It's also maybe opening up, I've said, to the inner world. I'm just going to add a couple of things over here on the top left, and that is, has anybody found themselves working perhaps longer hours and not creating those work boundaries, and that may be because of some of that inner stuff that showed up? Okay, so the positive thinking and affirmation. So from a research perspective, the positive thinking and those positive affirmations have been shown that they could potentially have a detrimental effect if we're using those in terms of avoidance. So again, in terms of the ACT model, it is about showing up to those emotions, because again, when I talk about psychological safety, I'll talk about that positive thinking and the impact that could potentially have on the team and how they respond, and that could send them back into the silence. So, it might be about here even setting boundaries in terms of your working hours, giving yourself time for yourself and your family, time to relax, and getting good quality sleep. Because if we say, even down here in the bottom right, what's important is that I am proud of the work that I do, then I want to perform well. If I'm going to perform well, then I do need to look after myself. So what we have here is a simple explanation to individuals and how they respond in terms of what shows up inside. So what's on the top left of the matrix gives us relief. These are the strategies that we have for getting rid of the unwanted stuff. On the right side, these are things that will give us satisfaction, because watching Netflix and shouting and venting will only ever give us temporary relief. It will not give us permanent relief. But the satisfaction will allow us to live the life that we do want to live, even in the presence of those difficulties. So moving from the psychological flexibility, what I want to move to now is to talk about psychological safety. And so psychological flexibility is me as an individual. Psychological safety is then creating psychological safety within a group. And this is a climate in which people are comfortable expressing and being themselves. So this is about enabling people to bring their true selves to work in whatever form that may take. And so that is, team members will feel able to take risks around their team members, and they'll be confident speaking out about ideas or suggestions, or even how they feel, without feeling the fear of feeling embarrassed about that, or feeling that they will be punished for doing so, or even again being able to admit a mistake without fear of reprisal. So psychological safety is the next stage in creating those high-performing teams. And some of you may be aware that in terms of the psychological safety, Google did some research, which was Project Aristotle. And what they identified was that there were 5 characteristics of high-performing teams. And what you'll see at the top is their psychological safety is at the very top of the list. They identified that this was about team members being able to take risks without feeling insecure and embarrassed. And the other 4 there you can see and you will understand. So dependability, structure and clarity, meaning of work, and impact on others. But what they did identify was that psychological safety is at the number one there, and it was by far the most important, and it underpinned the other four. What are the benefits then of creating psychological safety? The benefits are by creating a more agile organisation, improving competitive edge, increased levels of initiative, better communication, and it creates the conditions for learning, innovation and growth. And ultimately that is what we want to try to do today. And you'll see here, psychological safety is not a perk. It is an essential to producing high performance in this VUCA world that we live in. For those of you that have not heard of that term before, that is that we live in this volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world. Therefore, we need people speaking out and telling us what they see and what they hear from colleagues and from customers so that the organisation can progress. In terms of psychological safety, one of the things that I want to highlight before I'm going to take us through how do we achieve psychological safety using another tool. Here are some new behaviours that emerged from the pandemic. So this is research that was done by Corn Ferry. And one of the things that I'd like to highlight on that list is the empathy. So as leaders, I think we would all admit that empathy wasn't one of those things that was high on our list. But today we realise that it is really important to be able to put ourselves in other people's shoes and to see the world from their perspective. Then we get an understanding of where they are, what they can do, and what we can do to help them to perform within our organisations. So how do we go about achieving psychological safety? Well, psychological safety can be achieved using then the pro-social matrix, again developed by Dr. Kevin Polk. And in this case, what we're saying is, this is no longer me, but it is we as a team. So as the team that we work in, we are as leaders leading teams, how can we create this energetic, enthusiastic and emotionally connected team? So again, I start in the bottom right of the matrix. The question here is, I think there are two questions. One is, what is the group's shared purpose? And each group will have a different shared purpose. But for the purpose of this exercise, I'm going to ask that question. So what is important to the group? So if you think about your team that you're leading at the moment, what might be important to that team? What are the things that you feel that they are important? And it would be good if you could use the chat box for this. And again, I'm going to put in here the empathy. So empathy, I think everybody wants everybody in the team to be able to put themselves in other people's shoes and to see world from their perspective. So empathy is something that might be important to the group. Anything else? So helpful and supportive. Thank you. So that the members of the team are helpful and supportive. Anybody else think of anything that would be important to your team? Encouraging. So in terms of leading teams through this pandemic, it is important to show up and think about what is important to your team. So kindness, transparency, somebody mentioned the word earlier, compassion, and I think the team might be looking, so ease to work with, understanding. I think in today's world, we all want to have a little bit of fun as well at work. I think that's important, that we still understand that fun is something that is needed. I think teams also understand that they need to be agile and flexible, to be able to change and adapt, to be able to survive. So, and what's important to the group is security. Security to be able to deliver, security in terms of the job role. So again, now if I move here over to the bottom left of the matrix, the question here for groups then is, and for teams, what might show up inside your colleagues, those teams that you're leading, that would move people away from that shared purpose. So yeah, sorry, Andrea, I'm just going to go back here and add trust is another thing that team members might want as well. So what might, ego is showing up that gets in the way. Anybody else help out here in terms of what might be showing up within your team? Resentful. So yes, there has been some resent in terms of, I think, perhaps maybe why were people chosen for furlough and they weren't, or vice versa. So yeah, competitive might be something that's showing up. It could be a feeling of confusion. It could be the feeling of suspicion. Okay, so lethargy, spite. Great. These are all great feelings that we need to acknowledge could be showing up. Irritated. Irritated with the way things are, and it could be also feeling alone maybe within the team might be something that could be showing up within team members. If we move then into the top right of the top left, I should say, of the matrix, and we move into the external world, what are some of the things as leaders that you might be seeing or hearing from your team that might lead you to believe that they are trying to get rid of what is showing up inside? So I'll start this off. We might see productivity dipping. We might see people blaming others. We might see some absence of people attending work. We may see people avoiding tasks or conversations. We may see the silence. I mentioned that earlier in terms of the positivity. So if you as a leader are trying to remain very positive and say, look, it'll be all right and we're going to get through this, those are guarantees that you just can't necessarily give. So staff turnover going up. So people may want, again, what might be important to some people is to be realistic. And so being very positive can be something that would switch people into the silent mode. Well, there's no point in saying about something that's wrong or that I've seen, because this will be viewed as negative, and so it would be better for me just to be quiet. Mistakes are made. It is another thing that might be happening because of those feelings that are showing up in individuals. And it might be the camera on video calls turned off because of how people are feeling, and there may be conflict that we may see within the team. So those are things that we could be seeing that are as a result of what is showing up inside. So just remembering again that what's on the top part of the matrix is what I would see or hear people doing in their 5 senses. And this is about trying to understand the team better, to be able to lead energetic and enthusiastic and emotionally connected teams, emotionally connected to your organizational purpose, because we've talked about the shared purpose. So the fourth question then, again in the matrix here, the pro-social, is what behaviours or actions could team members do to move closer towards the shared purpose and what's important? So what are some of the things that we could do to create those energetic, enthusiastic and emotionally connected teams if we look at the list of what's important in terms of empathy? So the time I spent earlier on grief, I think it is about acknowledging in teams what has been lost. So what have we lost as a team, and what have we lost as individuals? We need to give the team time and space to be able to grieve for those things and to move through the grief curve. So also team members, it's about showing up to emotions. instead of being on the left side of the matrix and perhaps avoiding those emotions and pushing those away. So it's about showing up to those and opening up emotionally. It could be perhaps teaching the team the ACT and pro-social matrix, because this is something that you know, in terms of takeaways today, you can go away and you can do this with your team. Anybody like to, so increase in complaints can be over on the left side. So what we could ask people to do is to see mistakes as learning opportunities. Encouraging people to speak out. And yes, it's the feedback and evaluation. So providing feedback and the space to talk to individuals about how they are feeling. And it might be also, it is reflecting and getting feedback on the leadership style. It's also about creating challenges. So I think there's a number of organizations creating exercise challenges, but not everybody will be into exercises. So it is about appealing to everybody. So if we want innovation and creativity in organizations, then it's perhaps about creating an art challenge or a gardening challenge, and all of those things that give people something to think about outside of work, that are moving them towards the person that they want to be. So take time to look and anticipate issues. And is to develop that learning culture rather than the blame culture. And it is also then in the opening up to emotions, it's the whole emotional intelligence. So these are purely just examples, because the purpose of showing you the pro-social matrix is that you can use this matrix yourself to find out what's important to your team in terms of what will get them energetic, enthusiastic, and emotionally connected. And in doing so, you will create psychological safety, because you've got to remember you're asking questions about things that people would prefer not to experience. We'd all prefer not to talk about how we're feeling. But if you are encouraging people to do that, then you will absolutely get people to start talking about it. And so in the next few weeks, even just in terms of key takeaways for the session before I start coming to your questions, what I'd like you to do is, from today, is to start noticing what's important to you and asking the team what is important to them. I'd like you to start noticing what internal experiences are showing up for you and what internal experiences you might be seeing in your team. You will get an indication of what they are feeling from their actions and their behaviours. It's not that they're bad people, it's just because it's a response to emotions. I'd like you also to notice then what team members are doing that are moving them away from those unwanted things that are showing up, and what you might do as a leader in terms of that. Because what we need to do is we need to lead by example. So as leaders, even in terms of moving towards, we need to admit when we've made a mistake. We need to admit that we don't have all the answers, because I think in terms of thinking that we know it all, or people believing that you as leaders have it all, isn't going to be good. So telling the team that you don't have all the answers and that you need their involvement and input will also help to create some energy. And so, yeah, I think Neil's just popped in the chat box there. If you have any questions for me, because we'll be coming to the end very shortly, please feel free to do so, and I will answer those. And then the fourth one there in terms of noticing is noticing what actions or behaviours could I do as a leader, could I do in my own personal life that would move me towards what's important. And also then let's think about what we could do as a team to move towards what's important. We can very easily get bogged down into the doing. And the purpose again of using the pro-social matrix is about noticing, some perspective taking a step back and looking at what is going on within the team and how we can move forward. So what I've done is I've shared with you the emotions and feelings that could be showing up inside people. I've shared with you a little bit about psychological safety, what it is and why it's important. And I've used then the ACT and the pro-social matrix to help you to know how you could create psychological flexibility and psychological safety within your teams, which we know does contribute to productivity, performance, and ultimately improved profitability. So Neil, I think it's probably time that I stopped talking at this point and came to any of those questions that we might have.
That's great. Thank you very much, Julie. Really, really interactive, which is fantastic. Thank you to everyone for putting in all your comments and interacting with Julie through the chat. One question that's just come in, it's anonymous, just says, is it okay to ask team members to turn their cameras on during team meetings?
My answer to that would be yes. And I think, first of all, what I would be doing is I would be having a conversation with the individual about why they are doing that. So the thing that I asked in the ACT matrix is, so what's showing up? And that's a really critical question for leaders to be asking their people. The softer side of leadership is what is showing up. So when we know what is showing up, then we can respond to that. So I think it is important that we do ask people to turn their cameras on so that we can see what is going on with that individual, and it is because we care for them. So it's not necessarily always about what we do, but it's about how we do it and the why we do it, so that people understand the reason for that and that leaders do care about their people.
Brilliant, thank you. Just another comment and question. Excellent presentation, very interesting. How do you ensure that this works in larger businesses?
That's a great question. And really, in terms of how this works in larger organizations, what I would suggest is it is about training all the leaders in the organization to be able to use both the ACT and the pro-social matrix. Because what they can do is they can use their pro-social matrix with their teams. And this is about creating that culture, about talking about some of those things that at the moment most people would prefer not to talk about. So it's about teaching leaders to be able to do that, to be able to cascade that down. And that's then about the role modeling after that. So it is in the larger organizations of teaching leaders to be able to do this and the importance of it.
Fantastic, great. And just a comment from Andrea good and just saying, great presentation, very insightful. So I think that is our time now, and I think that's all questions that have come in at the moment. So it's just for me to say, Julie, thank you so much for your fantastic presentation. It certainly was very insightful, and I know lots and lots of people will take away lots of advice. I do genuinely loved how interactive it was with everyone, so thank you very much for that. As I said at the very start, we will be sending all attendees a copy of the slides. So Julie's actually going to save these slides that were all annotated with your comments and everything, so you will have a copy of that sent to you. We will be sending out with those slides just a link to a short feedback form. So we would really appreciate if you can take literally a minute just to give some feedback on the session. You can put some comments in as well, and that just really helps the council build for future events. So we really appreciate if you can complete that form whenever you get the link. Remember, don't forget to tune into the council's Facebook page tomorrow afternoon or evening, that we are going to announce the daily winners for each of the days of Enterprise Week. So each day, someone that has attended an event will be randomly selected to win a prize, and the prize is either an iPad or a Fitbit. So if you do win one of those, a council officer will be in contact. Do feel free to register for any of the remaining events. You can go onto the council website. It's free of charge to register. So we finish tomorrow, so there's only maybe a couple more left if you want to sign up to. So again, on behalf of Mid-Ulster District Council, thank you to everyone for taking part and attending today. Most of all, also thank you to Julie for your time and for the fantastic presentation. And we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you to all of you for attending. I hope you found it useful. And thank you to Mid-Ulster Council also.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Stay well.
Thanks. Bye-bye.